Oh, what up, you guys? It's your boy, the Kryptonian Saiyan, bringing you a review for One Piece chapter 196. And I'm going to take this moment and I'm going to do two things, right? I'm going to do a little bit of trolling, so I'm just going to go ahead and warn you now. But the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to point out what I've been talking about for a while. You know, some of you guys have kind of, seen what I was talking about when I said that Oda, when it comes to drawing women, I feel like that's his one weakness. Like, all of his men have a distinct look to them, but if you take away the hair on the women, they all have the same facial structures, and I thought that it was a little repetitive. Okay, so this is the little cover story right here. I'm gonna zoom in for you. Now, that facial structure is the same thing that we've seen with Nami and Miss All Sunday and Belle. I mean, I can just keep going with the women. It's all the same. In this case, like, the lips are a little different, but the facial structures, eyes, like, all that looks about the same. Now, the other thing, I am gonna, troll now. Some of you guys like, oh my god, why isn't he showing the manga panels? Does he not really own the volumes? The fuck is going on? Saying, you fucking liar, you hypocrite. No, I had the volumes. I pre-recorded the last, like, 3 volumes worth of shit. New, because the lighting is horrible in my last spot. Like, I do a lot of recording in my room / like the studio. So what I'm gonna do, like, I'm gonna record here. I'm gonna see how it works. So there's not gonna be as much background stuff. Okay, so kind of bland. It might just be for the day. Just depends on whether or not I like how this goes. But with that being said, I want to jump right into the chapter. Okay, and the thing about this chapter is I'm loving what we're seeing with Crocodile. Okay, like, he might mess around and be my favorite One Piece villain. Scratch that. He is my favorite One Piece villain, simply for the fact that we haven't had one up to this point who I feel has been memorable. Like, Buggy, kind of funny, whatever, okay? Morgan, indifferent by him. Like, I like the guy, but as I started reading more and more into One Piece, he's falling down there. Like, I just love the dude up until about probably 2 arcs ago. Wapple could care less about him. Don Krieg, same thing, could care less. Kuro, I was loving for a while because I love the cold and calculated type of people. But Kuro's kind of falling down that. Maybe it's because I'm caught up in the moment with Crocodile, but that arrogance, I'm loving what I see with his arrogance. And it speaks volumes to what Oda is doing as a writer. And the reason why I say that is with Crocodile, he's very arrogant. And I think that it's very important to point out the fact that he is arrogant. And the reason why it's important to point that out is with Crocodile, one of the things that we see is that when he sees Vivi's father's royal guard show up and they're drinking the fuel, the poison fuel that gives them superhuman powers, and in exchange it's going to lead to them dying. Crocodile basically says, why should I fight you? You got, like, fuck you guys. Like, fuck y'all. Y'all niggas go over there somewhere. Like, I don't have time for this shit. Like, that, I love that. And the reason why is we see it with the numbered agents. Even with Vivi, when Vivi was first introduced, all of them had a certain lure to them, a certain level of arrogance. Like, look at what Miss All Sunday did when she was introduced. She went straight onto the Straw Hats ship. And that takes some serious balls to say, I'm going to go here, you're not going to be able to do shit to me, I'm going to walk out, and that's that. And the thing is like, when you look at Mr. 3 and his fight with Sanji, you look at Mr. 4 and his fight with Usopp, you look at Zoro and Mr. 1, Nami and Miss Doublefinger, especially Nami and Miss Doublefinger, there's a lot of arrogance there. And I thought that that was key, because it shows that Oda understands how leadership works. When you're in a leadership position, one of the things you have to be mindful of is whether or not you realize it or whether or not they realize it, your subordinates are going to unconsciously take on some of the qualities and different ways that you think, and actions are going to start to mimic you. And it's because they recognize you as being the leader. And so when you look at somebody like Crocodile, who they didn't even know Crocodile was their leader. They just knew that it was Mr. Zero, and they had some very limited interaction with them. You know, like with Mr. 3, where Mr. 3 should have been talking to Crocodile, but it was actually Sanji and they were talking on like the snail phone. And just seeing how he spoke to him then and seeing how he was speaking to Sanji, it just shows you that he probably had that same interaction with all of them. So you can see how it bleeds over into him. And the reason why I thought that that was key is when Luffy eventually goes to have his rematch with Crocodile, especially because Crocodile already defeated him, what we are going to see is that arrogance is probably going to be the undoing of Crocodile. So I love seeing how Oda is setting that up. And with that being said, I want to talk about what I didn't like with this chapter, but I understand for pacing reasons why Oda needed to hurry the Zoro fight up, okay? I understand that because there was so much going on in this one that if he would have took time to flesh it out, then that fight could have gone a lot longer and the pacing would have been wrong. So I understand the reasoning for it. I'm a little disappointed because after Zoro gets this whole awakening in the last chapter, what ends up happening is it happens off panel. We see Mr. One saying, "Oh, you've improved. Who would have thought you could improve over the course of the fight?" And Zoro passes out shortly after Mr. One falls out. And with Zoro, it's because he's been cut open and he's bleeding. And one of the things Zoro says is like, the next step is to cut through metal. And I thought that, not metal, through diamond. And I thought that was interesting because it's showing that Zoro is going to continue to progress and improve, which is, you know, to be expected. But now he actually knows how to train because he's acquired a higher level of consciousness. And I really feel like Zoro was just training his body and not so much his mind. And I feel like now there's going to be a little more emphasis placed on, as well as on the body, but he's also going to place some emphasis on understanding like the meditative state that he was in when he recalled those flashbacks, those memories of his master and those prior teachings. You know, a lot of the times when we learn stuff, we retain it, but we don't always use it. And at least when we retain it, somewhere later down the line, we'll recall that information or dredge it up without even realizing. I feel like that's what Zoro did to an extent. So that was pretty cool just to see that little bit. But I do want to say this, you know, I want to draw a comparison to something. You know, Zoro basically improving throughout the fight, it really reminds me of what happened about 7 weeks ago in Dragon Ball Super, where Hit, when he was fighting against Goku, one of the things that Hit was doing was he was improving as the fight was going on. And I thought that that was a little bit of an ass pull when it happened because as the fight goes on, he's getting his time skip better and better and better. And it's just like a guy like that would have no limits. Whereas in the manga, and I have a point to this, so just bear with me, but in the manga, his time skip only really worked on people who were weaker than him, so he wasn't actually improving. And my point to this is I know Viz has messed up some translations before, so I want to know, did Mr. One actually say that? And if that's the case, if Zoro is improving as the fight goes on, is this Oda's way of doing the whole Namaka power-up that a lot of shonen characters get, where through their feelings for their friends and just their emotions, that the characters unlock a new level of strength? That is a very, very overused trope in shonens. And part of what I like about Oda is when he uses those tropes, a lot like how Togashi does, what Oda does is he actually finds a way to flip it on the head. And in this case, I don't feel like that's the case. And going forward even further, I could see an instance where we might actually see Luffy improve as he fights Crocodile. Then when you add in the fact that Crocodile is very likely to take the same stance he did before, when he told Luffy, "I don't have time to play with you. Here's a fucking sand clock. When this shit runs out, I'm gonna pat pat pow in this shit." And that's exactly what Crocodile did. So I'm wondering if that's how Oda's gonna justify Luffy defeating him. If that's the case, Luffy has to improve a whole lot. But I feel like Oda's also opened the door because Luffy, one of the things that's pointed out in this chapter is Luffy always gets better after he eats. And so I'm wondering, was Luffy hungry when he fought Crocodile? Because you had that one panel where Luffy basically tried to take a bite out of his ass, okay? At least that's what I gathered when I looked at it, and I feel like that might be a way of Oda symbolizing the hunger. Also, when Luffy was talking about the water, you know, Luffy himself might not have been thirsty, but when you eat, you usually drink water to wash this shit down. So I'm really wondering, is that Oda setting the stage for that? And if that's the case, let me know down in the comment section below. One other thing I do want to touch on is just the different Straw Hats, okay? With them, the characterization, it was very decent, okay? I felt like Oda, if this chapter would have been longer, because most shonens like this, most long-running shonens, or not even long-running, more serious shonens, okay? Like the battle shonens, they get about 17 to 19 pages. So that's a lot of room, because with other things, I don't know how many of you guys read Shonen Jump, but if you pay closer attention, you know, they do have some mangas in there where it's like 12 to 13 pages, and that's a chapter. So with battle shonens, they get longer chapters to do their thing, okay? And because of everything that was going on in the chapter, we couldn't really get more with the Straw Hats, but we saw some characterization. You know, with Usopp, he's like, you know, I need as much help as possible. And Sanji says, well, you drew the short end, like you drew the small lot. And with Usopp, you see the character growth, because with Usopp, because he was basically the only combatant, you know, Chopper, I look at Chopper more like he's a support character, you know, kind of like Wendy in Fairy Tail. Can Chopper fight? Yes. But the thing with Chopper, Chopper is the one that's kind of saying, okay, this is the weakness. This is what I gathered from that fight. This is the weakness. Let me buy some time and create an opening. That's what a support character does. You know, not much of the heavy lifting, because a lot of the heavy lifting in that fight was Usopp. And then with Nami, Nami says, oh, this is that one-hit wonder right here. This took some time to get it free. Let me get to the castle. But in the flashback, we see Nami where she's saying, well, you got to show us the goods if you really want to be grateful. And she's once again trying to get the money. So we see characterization with Nami. You know, Sanji's taking the objective stance. You know, Sanji and Zoro are the ones who really emerged as leaders, because Zoro wants to know where everyone is. He wants to make sure that everyone's okay, which is a leadership quality, because when you're in those positions, you feel a heavy burden to make sure everyone is okay. So with Zoro, I love seeing that. And then with Sanji, Sanji was like, hey, this is the plan, we're sticking to it. And he even goes back for Usopp. And like, that's what I mean, like you see leadership qualities with both of them. So the Straw Hats character development, that was cool in this chapter. But once again, I just find myself going back to Crocodile. And it's fitting, because when Chaka tries to go at him, you know, one of the things Crocodile says, oh, devil fruit, fuck that shit. Like, devil fruit, ain't nobody got time for that shit. And you see off panel, Crocodile, he takes care of him, right? Takes care of him, no problem. And then one of the things Crocodile says, which is very key, he says that you shouldn't throw life away like that. Value it. And I thought that that was interesting, man, because Crocodile's showing some philosophical stuff, but the fact that he could have killed like the different members in King Crocus's guard, okay? He could have done that. And he brushes it off like, hey, you're going to die anyway. But I get the feeling that Crocodile isn't necessarily someone who just enjoys killing for the sake of killing. That's just what I get. I feel like with Crocodile, even though he's one of the 7 warlords, or probably because he's one of the 7 warlords of the sea, when he decides to take a life or to get into some type of combat situation, it's because there's something that benefits him, or there's a reason for it. And if that's the case, I'm going to love the character. But overall, very good chapter on a lot of fronts, on a whole lot of fronts, man. That I didn't find much to, you know, nitpick on this chapter. This is probably one of the better written ones. It's a great way to start off the volume. But guys, that's it for this review. I dropped a couple questions for you guys in this video, so let me know what you guys think. But as always, thanks for watching.
はい